Every single night, somewhere on this planet, someone looks up at the stars and asks the same question. Are we alone? But here is the part nobody talks about. What if something up there is already watching us? What if it has been watching for a very long time? And what if the most powerful being in the entire galaxy has had her eyes locked on one tiny, stubborn, emotional species? Us. That is not a theory. That is a story backed by logic, courage, and one simple truth that most people are not ready to hear. The truth behind this will shock you. Today, you are going to discover 3 things that will change the way you see humanity forever. First, you will learn why the most powerful alien ruler in the known galaxy chose Earth out of billions of worlds. Second, you will find out what she has been secretly studying about the human race for over 300 years. And third, you will uncover the one thing she desperately wants from you. Not your technology, not your resources. Something far more valuable. Something no other species in the universe has. This is not just a story. This is a mirror. And when you look into it, you might just see something that surprises you. So stay right here. Do not move. Because what comes next is going to keep you glued to this screen from start to finish. Let me show you exactly how this happened. The year was 2187. Earth had changed. Cities floated above the clouds. Cars flew between silver towers. Humans had colonies on Mars and mining stations near Jupiter. They had even sent a small crew to the edge of the solar system. Humanity was proud. Very proud. But pride has a way of blinding people to things that matter most. On a cold Tuesday morning, in a quiet research station buried beneath the mountains of northern Canada, a young scientist named Marcus Cole sat alone at his desk. He was 29 years old, thin with dark circles under his eyes from too many sleepless nights. He worked for a division of the Global Space Agency called the Deep Signal Unit. Their job was simple on paper. They listened. They tracked signals from deep space. Most days, nothing happened. But that Tuesday was not most days. At exactly 4:17 in the morning, Marcus heard something he had never heard before. A signal. Clean. Structured. Repeating. It was not random noise. It was not a pulsar or a dying star. It had a pattern. A deliberate, intelligent pattern. His hands started shaking. He ran the signal through every filter he had. The results came back the same every single time. This was not natural. Something had sent this signal on purpose. And based on the trajectory, it was heading directly toward Earth. Marcus picked up his phone and called his supervisor, Dr. Elaine Frost. She did not believe him at first. Nobody would have. But when she arrived at the station 40 minutes later and saw the data herself, her face went pale. How long ago did this start? She asked quietly. About an hour, Marcus said. She stared at the screen. This has a source coordinate. Can you trace it? He already had. The signal was coming from a region of space far beyond the known star maps. A region that had no official name. Scientists called it the Dark Fold. Nobody had ever explored it. Nobody knew what was in it. Until now, most people assumed nothing was. They were wrong. Dr. Frost immediately called the Global Space Agency director. Within hours, the station was filled with people. Military officials, government scientists, intelligence agents. Everyone was shouting. Everyone had a theory. Nobody had an answer. But Marcus kept listening. While everyone argued around him, he sat quietly with his headphones on and listened to that signal over and over again. And slowly, very slowly, he started to notice something buried inside it. Beneath the repeating pulse, beneath the carrier wave, there was something else, something subtle. Almost like a voice, not speaking words exactly, but communicating emotion. He could not explain how he knew that. He just did. He wrote in his notes that night, "It doesn't feel threatening. It feels like it's asking something." Nobody paid attention to that note. Not yet. Over the next 3 days, the signal grew stronger. Whatever was sending it was getting closer. The entire planet was on alert. Every major space agency was tracking the source. Military satellites repositioned. Emergency bunkers were opened in secret locations across the USA, UK, Russia, and China. People were scared. The news was full of panic. But Marcus was not scared. He was curious. And that curiosity would soon change everything. On the fourth day, the signal stopped. Just like that. Gone. Silence. The room of officials let out a collective breath. Some of them thought it was over. They started calling it a malfunction or a natural phenomenon that happened to look structured. They wrote reports. They closed files. They wanted to go home. But Marcus noticed something nobody else did. The signal had not stopped. It had changed location. It was no longer coming from deep space. It was coming from inside the solar system. Whatever had sent that signal was already here. He ran to Dr. Frost's office, heart pounding. "They're here," he said, hands gripping the edge of her desk. "They are already here. They moved faster than any ship we've ever tracked. They were in deep space 4 days ago, and now the signal is pinging from somewhere near Saturn's orbit." Dr. Frost stared at him. Then she stared at her screen. Her face said everything her mouth would not. He was right. The Global Space Agency went into full lockdown. Every astronaut currently in orbit received new orders. Every long-range telescope on Earth swung toward Saturn. Defense systems were quietly activated. And then something completely unexpected happened. A new signal came in, different from the first one. This one was not a pulse. It was not a pattern. It was, unmistakably, a language. Not English. Not any human language. But the structure of it, the way the sounds were built and layered, was similar enough to human speech patterns that the agency's AI translation system flagged it immediately. It took 6 hours to partially decode the message. When the words appeared on the screen, every single person in that room went silent. The message said only this: "I have been watching your kind for 300 of your years. I have seen your wars. I have seen your love. I have seen you burn your world and rebuild it with your bare hands. I have one question for you. And the answer you give will determine the fate of both our kinds. I am coming. Do not be afraid. I only want to speak to one of you. The one who has been listening." The room erupted. Officials argued. Generals demanded military action. Scientists debated whether it was a trick. Politicians called emergency sessions. The whole world was in chaos within 24 hours, because the message was leaked, as these things always are. But Marcus Cole sat very still. He read that message one more time. The one who has been listening. He looked down at his hands. Then he looked at the screen. Then he stood up very slowly, walked to the center of the room, and in a clear, calm voice that surprised even him, he said, "She's talking about me." Nobody laughed. Nobody argued. Because deep down, in that cold, humming research station buried beneath the Canadian mountains, every single person in that room already knew it was true. Something ancient and powerful was coming to Earth, and it had chosen one ordinary young man to speak to. The question was, why him? And the bigger question, the one that would keep you up at night if you really thought about it, was this: what did she want? The world did not sleep that night. Across the USA, families sat in front of their screens watching every news channel they could find. In London, people gathered in pubs and coffee shops, speaking in hushed voices, watching the same breaking news banner scroll across the bottom of every screen. In New York, Times Square was so crowded with people looking up at the giant screens that traffic had completely stopped. The message had been leaked in 3 languages within 12 hours. By morning, every person on Earth knew. Something was coming. And it wanted to talk. Inside the research station, Marcus was moved to a secure room. A team of military guards stood outside his door. They brought him food he could not eat and water he barely touched. He sat on the edge of his cot and stared at the metal wall. He was not afraid. That surprised him the most. He expected fear. Instead, all he felt was a deep, pulling curiosity, like a question that had been living inside him his whole life was finally about to be answered. Dr. Frost came to see him that evening. She looked tired and tense, but her eyes were still sharp. She sat across from him and placed a tablet on the table between them. "The agency wants to prepare you," she said. Prepare me for what? He asked. For contact. She paused. Whatever is coming, it specifically requested you. We don't know why. We don't know what it wants. But it said your name, not your title, not your agency. Your name, Marcus. He blinked. My name? I didn't hear my name in the signal. She slid the tablet toward him. On it was a second translation that had not been made public. Buried deeper in the signal, underneath the main message, was a secondary layer, an older layer, as if it had been encoded first and the main message was built around it. That secondary layer said, Marcus Cole, I have heard you listening. You are different from the others. You hear with more than your ears. I chose you before you were born. Come to me. Or wait for me to come to you. Either way, this meeting was always going to happen. Marcus read the words 3 times. He put the tablet down. He looked at Dr. Frost. How is that possible? He asked quietly. I've never sent any signals. I've never communicated with anything out there. I've only been listening. That's exactly what we can't explain, she said. Whatever is coming has somehow been aware of you specifically for a long time. We ran background checks on your entire life, Marcus. We looked at everything. Your childhood. Your school records. Your brain scans from your medical file. There is one thing that stands out. She pulled up a brain activity scan on the tablet. Every time you worked on deep space signals, your brain showed unusual activity in regions associated with empathy and pattern recognition simultaneously. Most scientists show one or the other. You show both, at levels we have never recorded in any other person. Marcus stared at the scan. What does that mean? He asked. We don't know. But apparently, something very far away noticed it a long time before we did. That night, the spacecraft entered the inner solar system. Every telescope on Earth tracked it. It was enormous, longer than a city. Shaped like nothing any human architect would have designed. It moved in a way that defied every law of physics they thought they understood. And it moved slowly, deliberately. Not like an invasion, like a visit. It stopped in orbit above Earth at a distance of exactly 50,000 kilometers. Close enough to see with a powerful telescope. Far enough to make a point. It was not hiding. But it was not pushing either. Then it sent another signal. Short this time. Just 4 words. Send me Marcus Cole. The debate that followed was the most intense political argument in human history. Every major government had an opinion. The UN Security Council held an emergency session that lasted 19 hours. Military commanders argued for a defensive strike. Scientists argued for a measured response. Diplomats argued for delay. The people of the world, watching it all unfold on their screens, were mostly terrified. But not all of them. Millions of people in the UK, the USA, Australia, and dozens of other countries posted the same message on social media, within hours. Send Marcus. Not because they trusted the alien. Not because they were not afraid. But because sometimes, when something massive and unknown steps out of the dark and asks to speak to you, the bravest thing you can do is say yes. Marcus himself was asked. Formally. Officially. He sat in a room with the heads of 7 governments on a video call and was asked directly if he was willing to go. He did not hesitate. Yes, he said. They spent the next 72 hours preparing him. They fitted him with sensors, communication devices, and a translation earpiece loaded with the agency's AI decoder. They gave him a small shuttle, pre-programmed for the journey. They briefed him on every protocol, every safety measure, every abort sequence. None of it mattered, really. And Marcus knew it. If a civilization that could cross the dark fold in 4 days wanted to do something to him, no human technology was going to stop it. But he went anyway. The shuttle launch was broadcast live across every network on Earth. 2 billion people watched. The station in Canada was silent as Marcus walked to the launch pad in his pressure suit. Dr. Frost shook his hand at the door. You don't have to do this, she said one last time. Yes, I do, he replied simply. He climbed in. The hatch sealed. The countdown began. And then the shuttle lifted off through the dark blue pre-dawn sky, rising higher and higher until it became just another bright point of light among the stars. In the spacecraft above, something ancient and patient and immeasurably powerful watched the little human vessel rise toward her. And for the first time in 300 years of watching from a distance, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Hope. The shuttle docked without a sound. Marcus had expected turbulence. He had expected alarms, mechanical grinding, the chaos of two incompatible technologies trying to connect. Instead, the docking was smoother than anything he had ever felt on Earth, as if the alien ship had simply reached out and gently pulled his shuttle in like a mother picking up a child's toy from the floor. That image unsettled him a little. He made a note of it. The hatch opened. The air that entered the shuttle was clean, warm. It smelled faintly of something he could not name. Not flowers. Not chemicals. Something older. Something that made him feel, inexplicably, like he was walking into a place he had been before. He stepped out. The corridor in front of him was vast. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it. The walls curved gently inward and were covered in something that looked like living material, faintly glowing in soft blue and silver tones. It was not metal. It was not glass. It was something between the two. Something that seemed to breathe. He stood there for a moment and just looked. Then a sound came from deeper in the corridor. Not a footstep. More like a rhythm. A soft, steady pulse. Like a heartbeat walking toward him. And then, she appeared. The alien queen was tall. Much taller than any human. She moved with a kind of slow, deliberate grace that made it impossible to look away. Her skin had a faint luminescence, like moonlight caught inside something living. Her eyes were large and deep, filled with a color that Marcus could not name, because it did not exist in any human language. She wore a garment that seemed to shift and change as she moved, not like fabric, but like light itself bending around her form, and on her head, not a crown of metal or jewels, but something organic and living. Thin, curved structures that rose from her temples and glowed softly. She stopped a few meters from him. They looked at each other. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. He let it out slowly. She tilted her head, just slightly. And then she spoke. The words were not in English, but the translation earpiece caught them and rendered them into his ear in a voice that was surprisingly gentle. "You came," she said. "You asked," he replied. Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, but Marcus, with that unusual dual-function brain of his, the one that read emotion and pattern at the same time, caught it immediately. She was surprised. Not by the fact that he came. She had expected that. She was surprised by how he answered. Short. Direct. Without fear. Without performance. "Most of your kind perform when they are afraid," she said. "I'm not afraid," he replied. She studied him. "No, you are not. That is unusual." She turned and began walking slowly deeper into the ship. She glanced back once, and he understood without being told. He followed. She led him into a chamber that took his breath away. It was circular, enormous, and the walls were covered from floor to ceiling in what looked like recordings. Thousands of them. Layered on top of each other, playing simultaneously but somehow not chaotic. Each one showed Earth. Different times, different places, different people. He saw a battlefield in what looked like World War II. He saw a hospital, a mother holding a newborn. He saw a flooded city with people forming human chains to rescue strangers. He saw a child planting a seed in cracked, dry earth. He saw a man running into a burning building. He stood in the center of the room and slowly turned, watching it all. "You have been watching us," he said. "For 312 of your years," she confirmed. "Why?" She moved to the center of the room and stood beside him. For a moment she said nothing. She just watched the recordings alongside him. Then she spoke. "My civilization is one of the oldest in this galaxy. We have seen 5,000 species reach what you call civilization. We have watched most of them. We have made contact with many. We have helped some. We have watched others destroy themselves." She paused. In 5,000 species across recorded history, we have found only 11 that possessed what your scientists would call empathy at a civilizational scale. The ability not just for individuals to feel, but for entire societies to organize themselves around the feeling of others. To sacrifice. To rebuild. To forgive. She turned and looked directly at him. Your species is the 12th. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You're saying we're rare. I am saying, you are almost unique, she corrected him. And almost unique things have a habit of disappearing before they understand their own value. Something about that sentence landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. He felt the ripple of it spread. What happened to the other 11? He asked. Her expression changed. It was not quite sadness. But it was close. Most of them did not survive their own technology. They gained the ability to destroy before they gained the wisdom to choose not to. 5 of the 11 are gone entirely. 3 exist as small broken remnants of what they were. 2 are still standing but only barely. And the 11th? He asked. She was quiet for a moment that felt very long. The 11th is us, she said. Marcus stared at her. You are one of the 11, he said slowly. We were, she replied. 3,000 years ago we nearly destroyed ourselves. We had the empathy. We had the emotion. And then we made a choice. We chose efficiency over feeling. We chose order over love. We told ourselves it was survival. It was not. It was fear wearing the mask of logic. She looked at the recordings on the wall. At the humans. At their messy, chaotic, beautiful, terrible, extraordinary lives playing out across thousands of screens. We survived, she continued. But something essential went with what we lost. Something we have been trying to find again for 3,000 years. We have searched every corner of this galaxy. She turned back to Marcus. Her enormous eyes held something that he now recognized with absolute certainty. Longing. And then we found you, she said. Marcus exhaled slowly. So that's what you want from us, he said. You don't want our technology. You don't want our planet. No, she said. You want to learn from us, he said. You want to feel again. She did not answer immediately. But the glow around her shifted. Warmer. Softer. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. I want to remember what it means, she said, to be alive. Marcus sat down on the floor of the chamber. He did not plan to. His legs just decided for him. He sat cross-legged on the smooth, breathing surface of the alien floor and looked up at thousands of recordings of his own species. The queen looked down at him. Then, slowly, she sat as well, folding herself to the floor in a way that seemed unfamiliar to her, as if it was something she had not done in a very long time. As if sitting on the same level as someone else was something her world had forgotten how to do. They sat together in silence for a while, just watching the wall of human lives. 3,000 years, Marcus finally said. That is a long time to carry that kind of loss. Yes, she replied. What was it like? Before, I mean, when your people still had it. She thought for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, lower, more careful, as if she was reaching for something buried very deep. We had music, she said. Not just sound arranged in patterns. Music that was born from pain and joy at the same time. Music that made you feel both larger and smaller than yourself simultaneously. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood that completely. We had grief, she continued. Real grief. The kind that tears you open. We had celebrations that lasted for days, because we could not contain the feeling of being grateful to be alive. We had arguments that hurt, and reconciliations that healed. We had stories. Stories we told not to record information but to share the feeling of being human. She paused at that word, then corrected herself. The feeling of being alive. Marcus was listening with everything he had. What changed it? He asked. A leader, she said simply. A very intelligent, very frightened leader, who believed that emotion was the source of our suffering. Who looked at our wars, our cruelty, our self-destruction, and concluded that feeling was the disease. So they offered a cure. What kind of cure? A biological modification. Voluntary at first. It dampened the stronger emotional responses. It reduced fear. It reduced anger. It reduced grief. She paused. It also reduced joy, and love, and wonder. But by the time most of my people realized that, they no longer felt strongly enough about it to resist. Marcus was quiet. He was thinking about Earth. He was thinking about social media algorithms that flattened emotion into numbers, about governments that managed populations by keeping them afraid, about systems that rewarded people for thinking less and producing more. He thought about how none of that was entirely different from what she was describing. It happened gradually, she said, as if reading his thoughts. That is always how it happens. No one woke up one morning and decided to stop feeling. It crept in slowly, wrapped in language that sounded reasonable. Efficiency, stability, progress, safety, Marcus added quietly. She looked at him. Yes, safety. They sat with that word between them. So now, Marcus said carefully, you have a civilization of billions that functions perfectly. No wars, no crime, no suffering. He paused. And no reason to get out of bed in the morning. She looked at him with those vast, unnamed color eyes. You understand faster than I expected. We have people on Earth who would envy you, he said honestly. They would look at a world without pain and think it sounds perfect. And what do you think? She asked. Marcus looked at the wall of recordings. He found the one showing the hospital. The mother holding the newborn. The exhaustion on the mother's face. The tears streaming down her cheeks. The absolute radiance in her eyes. I think that woman is the most alive person I have ever seen, he said. And she is crying. The Queen watched the same recording. Something moved across her face. A flicker, fast, almost like it surprised her. What do you call that? She asked. What your language calls the feeling she is having. We have a lot of words for it, Marcus said. Overwhelmed, grateful, terrified, in love, all of those at once. He paused. We usually just call it human. She repeated the word quietly. Human. For a long time after that, neither of them spoke. Then she stood and walked to one section of the wall. She touched it gently, and the recordings shifted. A new one appeared. It was not Earth. It was her world, 3,000 years ago, before the modification. He could tell because the beings moving through the streets below moved differently, more erratically, more alive. They touched each other. They argued, and embraced, and fell down and helped each other up. I have watched this recording 10,000 times, she said. I cannot feel what they feel. But I remember that I once could. The memory of a feeling is the most painful thing in the universe, because it tells you what you lost without giving it back to you. Marcus stood and walked to stand beside her. He looked at her world as it was before. Then he looked at his own species playing out across the rest of the walls. What exactly do you want to learn from us? He asked. You said you want to know what it means to be alive. But what does that look like in practice? Are you asking us to undo your modification? Are you asking to live on Earth? Are you asking to study us? None of those things, she said. She turned to face him fully. I am asking you to teach us how you survive it. He blinked. Survive what? The feeling, she said. Her voice was steady, but her glow intensified slightly, and Marcus had learned enough in the past hour to understand that meant something. We know from observation that human emotion is not mild. It is enormous. It is often devastating. You lose people you love and it breaks you. You fail at things that matter to you and it crushes you. You carry guilt, shame, fear, longing, and doubt, often all at the same time. She stepped slightly closer, and yet you continue. You wake up the next day. You try again. You find something to laugh about in the middle of your grief. You build things on top of your ruins. You love again after being broken. She stopped. The chamber was completely silent except for the soft ambient pulse of the ship. We do not understand how you do that, she said. Every model we have built, every simulation we have run, says that a species with your level of emotional sensitivity should have collapsed under the weight of it 10,000 years ago. You should not be standing. You should not be here. She looked at him with something that, in a human face, would have been wonder. But you are here. You are still here. And I need to know why. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he smiled. That, he said, is going to take more than one conversation. The conversations began the next day. Marcus sent a message back to Earth. Short. Calm. He told them he was safe. He told them the Queen meant no harm. He told them she wanted to talk. Then he put his communication device down and gave the next 7 days entirely to the work that was needed. Every morning the Queen came to the chamber. Every morning Marcus was already there. He brought nothing with him. No data. No presentations. No carefully prepared speeches. He just showed up and talked. He talked about being 7 years old and losing his dog and crying so hard he could not breathe. And then his mother sitting on the floor with him and holding him, and how that simple act made the unbearable suddenly bearable. The Queen listened. She recorded everything. But she also leaned forward in a way she had not done before. There was something different in how she held herself on those mornings, like someone who had been asleep for a very long time and was just beginning to feel the edges of waking. He talked about his first real failure. He had been 22, fresh out of university, absolutely certain he was going to change the world with his research. He submitted a paper that he had spent 2 years on. It was rejected. Harshly. The reviewer's notes were brutal. He said he went home, ate cereal for dinner, and stared at the ceiling for about 6 hours. The Queen asked, "And then?" Marcus smiled. "And then I got up the next morning and started over. Better this time, because I actually listened to what I got wrong." She processed that. "You use the pain as information. Every time," he said. "That's what we do. Pain is just data we haven't figured out how to use yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Marcus wrote down in his mind and never forgot. "In our language," she said, "there is no word for resilience. We removed it when we removed the need for it." He looked at her steadily. "That might be the saddest thing I have ever heard." She accepted that without argument. On the 3rd day, Marcus asked if he could meet others from her ship. She agreed. What he found surprised him. Her crew was enormous. Hundreds of beings of various shapes and forms, all moving through the ship with quiet, perfect efficiency. Nobody was speaking unnecessarily. Nobody was stopping to rest. Nobody was sitting somewhere just to look at a view or share a meal for the pleasure of it. It was the most organized, most functional, most deeply quiet place Marcus had ever been. And it felt profoundly empty. He sat down in the main corridor and did something deliberately. He started humming. A simple tune. Something his mother used to sing. It was nothing special. Just a little melody with no real purpose. Within 2 minutes, 3 crew members had stopped walking and were standing nearby, not interacting with him, not speaking, but clearly unable to walk away. Their heads were slightly tilted. Their eyes had changed focus. Marcus kept humming. By 5 minutes, there were 11 of them standing in the corridor. All stopped. All listening with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with analysis and everything to do with something pulling at something very old and very buried inside them. The Queen appeared at the end of the corridor. She watched her own people standing still around a human who was humming. When Marcus finally stopped, one of the crew members made a small sound. Not a word, not a signal, just a sound, short and quiet. But Marcus recognized it immediately. It was the sound of someone who wanted more. He looked at the Queen. "Your people haven't lost the capacity," he said. "It is still in there. They just haven't been allowed to use it." She walked slowly toward him. "What you are suggesting is not simple. 3,000 years of biological conditioning cannot be undone in a corridor." "I know," he said. "I'm not suggesting you undo it overnight. I'm suggesting that you start." She looked at her crew members, still standing in the corridor, still hovering near the place where the music had been. And if we start, she said carefully, the feelings that return will not only be pleasant ones. Grief will return. Fear will return. Loss will return. Yes, Marcus said honestly. And you believe that is worth it? He did not answer with words. He walked to the wall beside him and touched the recording display. He found the one he wanted, the mother with the newborn. He let it play. The Queen watched it. Her crew watched it. The woman on the screen was crying, exhausted, overwhelmed, more alive than anyone in that corridor had looked in 3,000 years. One of the crew members made another small sound. This time, it was unmistakably the sound of someone recognizing something they had forgotten they had lost. Marcus looked at the Queen. Yes, he said quietly. I believe it is worth it. On the 5th day, something happened that nobody expected. Marcus was in the middle of telling a story about a man in London who had spent 8 years building a community garden on a piece of wasteland between 2 housing estates. The man had been laughed at. He had been vandalized. He had been ignored by the council. He had kept going, and now, 8 years later, 100 families grew their own food there and knew each other's names in a neighborhood where nobody used to speak. He was in the middle of the story when the Queen made a sound. He stopped. She was looking away from him. Her hands, those long, luminescent hands, were pressed flat against her knees, and the glow around her was doing something it had never done in the time he had known her. It was flickering. Not with malfunction. Not with distress. With something that Marcus recognized with a jolt to his chest because he had seen it in his own mother's eyes, and in the eyes of his friends, and in the faces of strangers on park benches who heard something beautiful they were not prepared for. She was on the edge of tears. She had not cried in 3,000 years. Her biology barely remembered how. But something in that simple, stubborn, beautiful story about a man and a garden and a community had reached down through 3 millennia of careful conditioning and found something that was still alive in there. Still waiting. Still wanting. She pressed her hands harder against her knees. Marcus said nothing. He did not move. He did not try to fix it or explain it or make it easier. He just stayed there. Present. Quiet. Witness. Because sometimes the most human thing you can do for someone is simply refuse to look away while they feel something for the first time. On the 7th day, Marcus asked to go home. Not because he was afraid. Not because he wanted to leave, but because the Queen had asked him to do something that required Earth. She had asked him to bring her a message from the world itself. Not from governments. Not from agencies. Not from officials. From people. She wanted to hear from the ordinary ones. The ones who planted gardens and hummed in corridors and cried at hospitals and rebuilt after floods. She wanted their voices. Not their analysis of emotion. Their actual, unfiltered, unedited expressions of what it felt like to be alive. Marcus understood. And he knew just how to make that happen. When his shuttle descended back through Earth's atmosphere and landed at the Canadian station, the reception was overwhelming. A crowd of journalists, officials, and scientists waited outside. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted from every direction. Marcus walked past all of it. He went straight to Dr. Frost's office, sat down, and said 4 words. She needs our voices. It took 2 weeks to organize. The Global Space Agency, for once in its existence, stepped back and let ordinary people lead. The call went out across every country, every language, every platform. Not for speeches, not for formal declarations, for stories. Simple ones, the kind you tell someone you love before bed, the kind you whisper at a gravesite, the kind you shout at a stadium when your team wins for the first time in 40 years. They came in faster than anyone expected. A grandmother in Yorkshire recorded herself talking about her late husband. She talked about the way he made tea wrong every single morning for 51 years, and how she would give everything she owned to drink that wrong tea one more time. A teenager in Chicago recorded himself talking about the exact moment he realized his best friend was the most important person in his life. It happened during a thunderstorm when they were stuck under a bus shelter sharing one pair of earphones, listening to music and saying nothing, and he thought, This is what matters. A farmer in rural Australia talked about a drought so severe, he thought he would lose everything, and how his neighbors, people he had barely spoken to in years, showed up one morning with equipment and food and time, and they saved his harvest without being asked. A firefighter in London talked about the silence after. A teacher in Texas talked about a student who told her that her class was the only reason he came to school. A hospice nurse in Scotland talked about holding the hand of a patient in their final moments and whispering that they were not alone, and watching the fear leave someone's face. Thousands of voices, then tens of thousands, then millions. Marcus sent them all up. He sat in the communication room at the Canadian station and watched the data stream upward toward the Queen's ship. He imagined her in that chamber, surrounded by her living walls, listening to a grandmother in Yorkshire talk about tea made wrong for 51 years. He hoped it was enough. He hoped it was what she needed. But he did not know. 3 days after the final transmission was sent, the Queen's ship moved. The world held its breath. It descended. Not aggressively, slowly, deliberately, like every move she made. It descended to an altitude of 5,000 meters above the Canadian mountains and held position. And then she sent one final signal. It reached Marcus on his personal device, not the agency's systems, his own. It said, "Come up one more time. There is something I want to give you." He went. When he stepped out of the shuttle into the familiar glowing corridor, something had changed. He could feel it before he saw it. The air was different, warmer, more alive. As he walked deeper into the ship, he began to hear something. Sound. Different from before, not the organized, efficient communication of a perfectly functioning civilization. Something messier. Something with rhythm and variation and unpredictability. He turned a corner and stopped. 3 of the crew members were sitting together. One of them was making a sound with their hands against the floor. A rhythm. Imperfect. Halting. Experimental. Another was listening with their head tilted and their eyes closed. The third was watching the first 2 with an expression that Marcus had never seen on an alien face before. Delight. He stood very still so he would not interrupt it. Then he walked on to the main chamber. The Queen was there, standing in the center. The walls were playing all the voices, all the stories. Thousands of them, layered and overlapping in a way that should have been chaotic, but was somehow, instead, the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever heard. She turned when he entered. And Marcus saw it immediately. Her eyes were different. The unnamed color had deepened. And at the outer edge of each of those vast, extraordinary eyes, something glistened. Not tears. Not quite. But the biological precursor to them. Something long dormant, stirring. "I wanted you to see this," she said. Her voice was different too. Slower. More weighted. As if each word cost something now that emotion was beginning to return to it. "What has happened?" Marcus asked softly. "Something is waking up," she said, slowly. "In many of my people. The recordings your world sent. The stories. They reached something that I was not certain was still reachable." She paused. "I do not yet know what this means for us. We will need time. Perhaps generations. The modification runs deep. But it's moving," Marcus said. "It is moving," she confirmed. She walked to him and stopped close. Closer than she had ever stood before. He could see the living light in her skin shifting and pulsing softly. "I brought you here because I wanted to tell you something that is not in any signal or transmission," she said. "Something I wanted to say to your face." He waited. "What your species calls ordinary," she said, "is what 5,000 civilizations across this galaxy have failed to achieve." The grandmother and the wrong tea. The teenagers under the bus shelter. The neighbors who came without being asked. Her voice was low and steady, and full of something ancient. "You do not see it. You move through your lives as if it is nothing, as if it is simply what happens." She looked at him. "It is not nothing. It is everything. It is the rarest thing in all of recorded history, and you are on the edge of losing it the same way we did. Slowly, without realizing. Wrapped in language that sounds reasonable. Marcus felt it land in his chest. Hard and real. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you can still choose," she said. "We could not. By the time we understood. But you are standing at the edge right now. And you can still look down. And you can still step back." She placed one hand gently against his chest. Over his heart. "That," she said quietly, "is what I wanted from you. Not data. Not resources. Not an alliance." Her glow was warm and full and alive in a way it had not been since he first arrived. "I wanted you to know your own value. So that you would not give it away." Marcus stood very still. Outside the ship, 2 billion people were watching the sky. Inside the ship, one ordinary young man from Canada stood in front of the most powerful being in the known galaxy, and understood, for the first time in his life, what it truly meant to be human. Not the technology, not the intelligence, not the ambition, the feeling, the stubborn, costly, extraordinary, irreplaceable feeling. He looked at the Queen. "Thank you," he said. She lowered her hand. She stepped back, and in that unnamed color of her ancient waking eyes, Marcus Cole saw something he would spend the rest of his life trying to describe. He never fully succeeded. But he spent every single day trying, and that, in the end, was the most human thing of all. Now here is the part that should really make you think. Throughout this entire story, the Queen never once asked humanity for power. She never wanted our weapons. She never wanted our land. She never wanted to rule us or study us like specimens. She wanted to remember how to be alive. And the twist, the real twist that hits differently the second time around, is this. She had been watching Earth for 312 years. She had the most advanced technology in the galaxy. She had perfect order, perfect efficiency, perfect survival. And after all of that, after 3,000 years of living without the weight of feeling, the one thing she flew across the galaxy to find was a grandmother talking about wrong tea. Think about that. The most powerful being in the known universe crossed the dark fold, past Saturn, descended above our mountains, and asked to hear the story of a man who spent 8 years building a garden that the world told him was pointless. Because that is where the power actually lives. Not in the grand gestures, not in the monuments or the declarations or the achievements that get recorded in history books. In the quiet, stubborn, generous, grieving, laughing, trying again. Small, extraordinary acts of ordinary human beings. This story started with a question. Are we alone? The answer, it turns out, is no. But the more important question was always the other one. Do we understand what we have? The answer to that one is still being written. By you. Every single day. If this opened your eyes, just wait until you see what comes next. Because in our next video, we are going to explore what happens when the Queen returns, what she brings back, and what humanity must face when the rest of the galaxy finally learns what she found here. You are not going to want to miss that one. Before you go, let's quickly bring together the biggest things from this story, because this one had layers. The first takeaway is this. Humanity's most powerful asset is not its technology or its intelligence. It is its emotional depth, the capacity to feel deeply, to grieve fully, to love openly, and to keep going anyway. That combination is, according to the logic of this story, extraordinarily rare. Across 5,000 civilizations, only 12 species ever had it. And only one of them, us, still has it fully intact. The second takeaway is a warning. The Queen's civilization did not lose their emotional depth because of a villain or a disaster. They lost it gradually. Through choices that sounded reasonable. Through systems that rewarded efficiency over feeling. Through a slow drift away from the things that actually made their world worth living in. That warning is not subtle. It is not hidden. It is aimed directly at us. Right now. In 2024. The third takeaway is the most important one. You are not ordinary. The things you consider small, the stories you think nobody wants to hear, the kindness you show without thinking, the way you hold someone's hand in a difficult moment, those things are not small at all. They are, in the grand scale of the universe, among the rarest and most valuable things that exist. Do not give them away quietly. Now here's what I want you to do. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, which is fitting given everything we just talked about, please hit the like button right now. That small action tells us you want more stories like this one, and it helps us bring these stories to more people who need to hear them. Subscribe to Hate-Fi Sci-Fi if you are not already part of this community. We tell stories that remind humanity of its own strength. Every single week, stories that come from the same place this one did. The belief that ordinary people doing extraordinary things is the most powerful force in the universe. And leave a comment below with your answer to this specific question. What is one small, ordinary moment from your own life that, when you really think about it, meant everything? It does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be impressive. It just has to be real. Share it below. Because I promise you, someone else is going to read your comment and feel less alone. And that is exactly what this channel is for. For those of you who want to go deeper, our next video is already in production. It is the follow-up to this story. We are calling it What Happens When the Queen Comes Back. And the things she brings with her are not what anyone expected. If you want to be notified the moment it drops, subscribe and hit the bell. Do not let the algorithm decide whether you see it. Make the choice yourself. One last thing before you go. The Queen crossed the entire galaxy to find proof that feeling deeply is worth the cost. She found it in the stories of ordinary people. She found it in a grandmother, a teenager, a farmer, a firefighter, a teacher, and a nurse. She found it in stories exactly like yours. So whatever you are carrying today, whatever feels too heavy, or too small, or too ordinary to matter, know this. Somewhere in this universe, it is the most valuable thing there is. See you in the next one.